Welcome to session 2 of Nexsen Pruet's Food and Beverage Friday webinar series. I'm Julie Medich, and I'm a member of Nexsen Pruet's Charleston office and part of the firm's corporate team. During today's seminar, we'll hear more about the challenges to food and beverage manufacturing industry's workforce from a legal perspective, as well as hearing success stories from industry partners out of South Carolina's Upstate region. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I want to review a few housekeeping rules that those of you that were with us last week probably heard, but we'll repeat again today. And in the first session, we explored innovation in food and beverage industry. Both last week and this week's sessions are being recorded and will be available on Nexsen Pruet's website soon. We'll send you an email when it's available so you can share with colleagues. We very much appreciate that. Please feel free to use the chat box to send questions to today's presenters or to continue the discussion with colleagues. You can also send questions to our speakers via a question and answer box. If you're having technical difficulties, which we had a little bit at the start here, please feel free to send a message to panelists in the chat room, and our webinar producer will help you out. Lastly, if you enjoy today's events, we encourage you to check out Nexsen Pruet's other webinar events via the link in the chat box, and to look out for future Food and Beverage Friday events to come. We're going to start with our first panel, which is the push for a minimum wage increase and other compensation compliance issues. First up today, we'll hear from two Nexsen Pruet employment attorneys, Mark Bacher and Sarah Batson, both in our Greenville office. According to the figures from the Washington Post, 39 million workers earned less than $15 an hour in 2019, representing 28% of the workforce. Mark is an employment law litigator and trusted legal advisor in employment and other business-related matters. He represents clients in federal and state court throughout North and South Carolina, arbitration panels before the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission, and other state and federal agencies. Sarah is a litigator and employment attorney who guides employers through a wide variety of complex issues and disputes. She practices in federal and state court and arbitrates also in North and South Carolina. Sarah, there's been a lot of press and talk about the minimum wage, especially ever since really in the whole 2020, the whole election cycle, and it has continued, obviously. What's the legal minimum wage in our area?
So under the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA, the federal minimum wage for covered non-exempt employees is $7.25 per hour. And that was effective July 24th, 2009. And it hasn't changed since then. Many states have their own minimum wage laws. South Carolina follows the federal minimum wage. In cases where the employee is subject to both the state and the federal minimum wage laws, the employee is obviously entitled to the higher of the two minimum wages. The Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division administers and enforces federal minimum wage laws. And sometimes they'll do audits and things like that to make sure that there's compliance there.
So there's nothing set right now that would increase it. There's no set standard every 2 years or 5 years or anything like that.
That's right. That's right. So the federal minimum wage does not currently increase automatically. There's not an automatic function there. Some state minimum wage laws will, but the federal minimum wage does not. So Congress would have to pass a bill that the president would sign into law for the minimum wage to increase. And like I said, some states have increased their minimum wage recently, and some have an automatic increase. But the federal minimum wage hasn't increased since 2009. And so that's giving rise to some of the recent discussion about increasing the minimum wage.
Mark, do you think there's plans anytime soon for it to be raised?
Thanks, Julie. And you're exactly right. The election from last year and the campaigns and certainly the results have brought this to the forefront. The Biden administration, as probably everybody on this call knows, passed the American Rescue Plan Act last month. There was a great deal of fanfare in the press, and which is one of the reasons why we're discussing this right now, that it would include a provision to raise the federal minimum wage to $15. There were attempts to have it included in that giant stimulus package, it was not included. And that's where we get to the civics lessons that was provided by the Georgia Senate runoffs in January. The Senate was left divided. The Democrats controlled because the Vice President Harris in this instance, breaks every tie. But there aren't 60 votes to support and survive a legislative filibuster for a minimum wage. So there were hopes that it could be included in the budget reconciliation process that requires only 50 votes. However, earlier this year, the minimum wage couldn't be included in that vote as part of the budget reconciliation process, so that portion of the package was dropped. The White House and President Biden both said that they were disappointed with that result and that he was going to work with leaders in Congress to determine, quote, the best path forward. Right now, what is that best path forward? Well, there's a standalone bill right now to increase the minimum wage to $15, at least by the year 2025, that was introduced by Senator Sanders in Vermont. It's called the Raise the Wage Act of 2021. It proposes to index future increases to the federal minimum wage to median wage growth, among other changes. And that way you wouldn't have to have this, this type of legislation pass anytime you want the minimum wage to mirror wage growth. Is the Raise the Wage Act of 2021 going to pass? Right now, I'd say it seems unlikely. Unless the Senate abandons the filibuster, there probably aren't enough votes to get up to $15 an hour. Senators from more rural states, even Democratic senator from West Virginia, Senator Manchin, has noted that the minimum wage, for example, in West Virginia doesn't need to be the same as it is in San Francisco. We'll see. But it's likely that, just like in prior years, this minimum wage bill is not going to pass. But we've been surprised already by politics, so we'll see what comes across the transom.
You just talked about how some states have it already at $15 an hour and other states don't. What's the landscape in North Carolina and South Carolina?
Yeah, good question, Julie. There's no there's no state minimum wage law in South Carolina. It doesn't matter because the federal minimum wage, of course, sets the standard there. But interestingly, only five states, including South Carolina, don't have a state minimum wage. The North Carolina Act, and this is true of many other states, just merely mirrors the federal act. So the North Carolina minimum wage is set at $7.25 or whatever the federal standard is. The North Carolina legislature did recently approve a $15 minimum wage, but that was for all state government employees. So they did not mandate that for private businesses. As you noted, and as Sarah said earlier, there's a good bit of activity in other states to increase the minimum wage or make automatic increases to the minimum wage. The Florida, for example, which is not a blue state, I mean, it's a red state right now, their minimum wage will increase to $15 by 2026 as a result of some activity on the ballot last November. So it's a good segue into what businesses should do to prepare, because it does look like minimum wage hikes are going to be inevitable. And it's important right now to engage with your employees, make workers feel appreciated and valued so they want to stay in these jobs when the competition for wages will heat up, because it does look like it's going to be on the way, if not sooner than later.
You've probably seen a lot of that heat up just in the last year too, in 2020, in terms of the competition for wage at that rate.
Yeah. I mean, not only that, I mean, we've already seen a lot, even with the pandemic, and I'm certain that our listeners will and attendees here will attest to, it's hard to find labor anyway. And if you do see the an increased minimum wage, that's going to continue to put some pressure on businesses to differentiate themselves.
So Sarah, in terms of the food and beverage manufacturing industry, are there special considerations in that area?
I mean, I think there are some regional considerations, and Mark made some good points, but not necessarily with regard to minimum wage. We would like to leave you with some specific numbers in this sector, just for our listeners to keep in mind. There are over 1.6 million employees in food manufacturing alone as of March 2021. And the average hourly earnings of all employees was $22.34. That's hourly earnings.
And this is national? These are?
Yes.
Okay.
And the earnings of production and non-supervisory employees, so non-supervisory, non-managerial employees, was $19.29 hourly earnings. And that's in the food manufacturing in March 2021. And so that just shows you, I mean, these are numbers that are subject to change, and it's promising that these numbers are relatively high in comparison to the current minimum wage. $7.25 is the federal minimum wage that we talked about. But either a minimum wage increase or a few industry titans that decide to raise minimum wage can cause a ripple effect. Companies will have to navigate any change in order to maintain competitiveness as an employer. Mark mentioned, just the need to continually staff positions and how it can be difficult to find employees for staffing needs as our clients are trying to grow and fill those positions. And to preserve competitive wages within a company. So at 1.6 million employees in manufacturing alone, an increase, whether voluntarily by a few high-profile employers or through legislative efforts discussed today, could make a big difference in the overall economy, for better or for worse. So we just thought that might be some relevant information.
Those are interesting. Thank you. Those are really interesting facts. When you first started talking about the minimum wage, Sarah, one of the first things you said was that except for exempt employees. Can you tell us a little bit about what the exceptions or exemptions are?
Yes. I love to talk about exemptions, FLSA exemptions. Can nerd out here for a minute. And they're actually really, really important. It's important to get these FLSA exemptions correct. And we see these oftentimes in audits. This can be a real focus of FLSA audits. So jobs that are covered by the FLSA are either classified as exempt or non-exempt. In order to be exempt, an employee must meet a specific salary threshold and perform job duties. In other words, they have to meet all these requirements of the Department of Labor's regulation. And what it means to be exempt is the FLSA provides an exemption from both the minimum wage and overtime pay for employees employed under certain white collar exemptions. So bona fide executive, administrative, and professional outside sales employees. There's also exemptions for computer industry employees, but these employees typically earn well over minimum wage, but they are exempt from, the focus is often in exemptions is overtime pay. And so they may work well over 40 hours a week. They may work under 40 hours a week, and you're just not having to track and pay that. But like I said, they're trying to meet a certain salary threshold, and there's talk about that increasing. The usual focus of the exemption is whether the employee meets the job duties, because the salary threshold is relatively easy to meet. Oftentimes these are well compensated positions. But just because an employee earns a salary doesn't mean they meet the exemption. And that's oftentimes where folks will fail an audit is, people think, well, they pay a salary, they meet the salary threshold, so we can classify them as exempt. And it's like, well, they may not actually. They still have to meet the job duties test. They have to meet this white collar exemption test. So if they meet the salary threshold, they also have to manage a certain number of employees. Or if you're trying to fall under the computer industry exemption, qualify in certain ways, or for example, the job has to have certain educational components or things like that. So when we help clients audit their exemptions or review, are you complying with the FLSA, we really help them understand these FLSA exemptions and are they properly classifying employees and positions accordingly.
And you said that it was high salary. Mark, what is that salary? What is the threshold that you all are talking about?
Yeah, that threshold is a little north of $35,000. And I'll just say, Sarah focused on the jobs duties test, and the reason, and that's been the focus of employment lawyers for the last 4 decades, really, on the exemptions. the salary test was hardly ever mentioned. I can't, until about 4 or 5 years ago, the salary test was rarely mentioned except in passing. And that's because for years, the salary threshold was about annualized at about $26,000. So not hard to meet, hardly ever litigated, usually not very much of an issue. About 4 or 5 years ago, in 2015, 2016, by far the issue gaining the most attention of employment law practitioners was the Department of Labor wanting to increase that salary threshold to about $50,000. Now, that was litigated, and there was an injunction filed that the Department of Labor did not follow the right procedures. And so that was struck really at the last minute, a couple of months before it was going to go into effect. But it really did cause a lot of employers to look at that exemption, look at their exemptions, and whether or not they could meet that $50,000 salary threshold. Well, during the Trump administration, that issue was revisited, and that salaried basis went from about $26,000 to $35,000. So that's the current rate is about annualized at a little north of $35,000 a year. There is pressure, as you can imagine. This will be a theme throughout this presentation, but there's pressure on the Department of Labor to increase that. Vice President, when he was Vice President, President Biden led that effort in the Obama administration to reach that nearly $50,000 threshold. So the Department of Labor is likely to have learned from their prior lessons and to try to increase that salary threshold over the next 4 years. But I'll also say this, Julie, that like the minimum wage, anytime you have federal lethargy or a little bit of delay on the federal front, that generates a bunch of state activity. As long as the feds are deadlocked on this, the states are going to lead the way, and this is going to be the case as well with the exemptions. Many states have their own versions of whether or not these tests are met. And it's not true in North Carolina or South Carolina or in this area, but if you're operating in other states, you may have to check these exemption laws.
So there are higher thresholds, and the other exemption rules are different in the various states as well?
That's right. And so that jobs duties test and the salary threshold, you might have some variance between what the federals, what's required by the federal government and by what particular states are, especially if you look at states like California and others that have followed that lead. Yep.
What other compliance regulatory issues are you seeing or expecting? Mark?
Yeah, I think Sarah and I both have seen a good bit, and I'll start with the Paycheck Fairness Act. The Democrats, with the support of the Biden administration, have renewed their push for the Paycheck Fairness Act. It would modify the Equal Pay Act, which provides for liability if you pay men and women differently for doing the same type of work. Under the Paycheck Fairness Act, employers would be liable for those pay gaps between men and women unless they can justify the disparity. So much easier proof burdens there, and more claims are going to be brought. It would also prohibit employers from asking applicants to disclose prior salary history. The rationale there is if pay disparity is through some sort of systemic discrimination, then paying based on salary history rather than a job to be performed is going to perpetuate that discrimination. It's uncertain that this bill is going to pass, but pay equity issues are absolutely a priority for this administration. It is for the EEOC. Several states and municipalities have already enacted salary history bans. The EEOC, as you might know, if you have more than 100 employees, provided or collected pay data analysis from 2018 and 19. That's expected to be analyzed in a report to go out later this year. And I'm certain it's going to support more initiatives and legislation for pay transparency and pay equity.
Is that salary history ban, you said that varies from state to state as well. Is that in South Carolina? Has South Carolina passed that?
Nope. South Carolina and North Carolina haven't. At least in North Carolina, I believe there are some municipalities and maybe some government type of prohibitions, but so far that has not affected private businesses in the Carolinas.
Okay. And so we talked about a lot of rules that apply generally to all different types of industries and things, but how do these rules specifically, I mean, what do you think this all means for food and beverage manufacturers?
Well, and I think Sarah wants to talk about a couple of other
You know, I was going to mention, thank you, Mark. I was going to mention that there's been some activity about paid leave proposals in addition to some of the wage issues. So, you know, on the state and federal level, we've seen COVID-related leaves like extended. We've all, you know, under the FFCRA, that leave, COVID-related leave, has been extended on a voluntary basis in 2021. But there's other legislation being considered for paid time off outside of COVID-related leave for health conditions, pregnancy, childbirth, other reasons. And COVID, like for example, in New York, there's COVID vaccination leave. You can provide paid leave for COVID vaccination, and there's other state leave related to COVID, and then other state leave, paid leave, and state by state that's being proposed and already enacted. And then, so some of these bills, some of these on the federal level are getting some traction from both sides of the aisle, and there's optimism that modest paid leave proposals are being considered in the near future. So that's just something on the radar. We're continuing to track that. We don't really have any way of predicting what's going to happen at this point, but just something else on the horizon that we're watching.
And for the paid leave, is that for just governmental employees? Is that for everybody? Or the proposals mixed?
I think time will tell. I mean, I don't know for sure really how this is going to pan out. I think there are proposals on both sides, and compromise we'll see. But I think right now, I mean, legislators are proposing paid leave for private employers as well. But, you know, we're still watching to see what's going to happen. Mark, do you have any other insights on that?
No, I do think we'll continue to watch and see what happens. And I'll go back to your question, Julie, from before. What does this really mean for the food and beverage manufacturers? And you know, you'll hear from William Floyd in a few minutes, but any change in the White House and the administration is going to bring a little bit of uncertainty and a lot of fluidity. We're recommending that all employers stay up to date on the changes in compensation law. What Sarah talked about and what I've talked about, they can have significant impacts on the food and beverage industry. So comp issues are always a big deal. They're popular with voters. They're definitely on the minds of activists, and they can bring concerns, even if they're popular, to businesses for sure.
Well, a lot to think about, and it sounds like there may or may not be a lot to come. So thank you all so much for presenting today and for letting us know all these very important issues in terms of employment issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks. Now there will be a brief pause before William Floyd comes on. So we're going to be talking about on our next panel, which is our second session today, workforce issues in the food and beverage manufacturing, which is going to focus on faces challenging the industry. Some of the topics are challenges to all industries, while some are unique to the food and beverage industry and also operating during a pandemic. So it looks like we're having a little technical difficulty in getting William's picture up, but I do think the sound is on, right, William?
I hear you loud and clear. Here we go.
All right, here we go. Now we're up and running.
That's right.
The fun of Zoom that we're all getting, we should be used to by now since it's been a while, but still things come up. So thank you all for your patience very much. And thank you, William, for joining us today. So I have with us William Floyd, who's an employment attorney in our Columbia office. For nearly 35 years, he has excelled in helping employers of all sizes in industry with important labor and employment problems. William reduces employers' risk by conducting interactive training for management teams, creating effective personnel policies, and counseling them through day-to-day, as well as complex human resource issues. He's a certified labor and employment specialist Specialist and the former chairperson of the South Carolina Labor and Employment Law. Welcome, William. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Julie.
Look forward to all that you're going to tell us today in terms of these workforce issues. So what are some workforce threats that are facing food and beverage manufacturing?
Julie, great question and great to be here with you. By the way, I think I'm still having a little technical problem here, but hopefully you can see me okay.
We can see you okay. Yeah.
Wonderful. It looks kind of weird on my end, but appreciate everybody's patience. What a great topic, a great day. You know, in the food and beverage industry, it's been under fire, so to speak, for the past year during the pandemic.
Yeah.
You all have been working hard, even when and despite very difficult circumstances. And so as we look ahead, it's really in part in terms of the upcoming threats, the present threats for the food and beverage industry, there are really three. And all you have to do is open the newspaper and you see them. So if you were to open the newspaper anytime this week, you would see three threats or challenges in food and beverage industry. One is workplace violence. Now, workplace violence we'll be talking about, Julie. The second is the pandemic itself, and we know the food and beverage industry has been laboring under that for a year. And then the third is the real risk or upcoming risk of unionization. So those are the three. Interesting.
How much of a problem, you mentioned the workplace violence, how much of a problem has that become?
You know, workplace violence knows no boundaries. And so this is not necessarily just a food and beverage industry issue. In fact, it impacts everybody, but it is a real issue. It's the number one, it's so bad that workplace violence is the number one cause of fatalities in the workplace for women, for example, because of domestic violence.
And when you say workplace violence, like what does that encompass? Because it's probably, people have different ideas of what that is.
Right. You know, workplace violence generally means either threats or actual physical violence impacting the workplace. And a threat could be anything from a phone call from a disgruntled spouse into the workplace, or it could be the disgruntled spouse coming onto the workplace wanting to have threat to harm of the spouse. And that's just a domestic situation. The things we've been reading about lately have been not a domestic violence situation. It's been more of disgruntled former employees or current employees.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's been, you know, some really sad incidents, obviously, that we all know about very recently on this topic. So what laws cover that? I mean, when something like that happens, what laws cover the workplace violence?
Really two areas. There's from the federal side is OSHA. OSHA applies to it, but there's not a specific OSHA regulation that covers workplace violence, but rather it's the general duty clause. And the general duty clause essentially is, you know, employers are responsible for providing a reasonably safe workplace. And so that part is the federal law. And in certain states, such as North Carolina and South Carolina, there are state law versions of OSHA. So the LLR in South Carolina, for example, is going to enforce the OSHA regulations. The other more general workplace violence laws are coming out of the common law. So this is the court-made law that we've had for many, many years, and it evolves, such as the concepts of negligence. And so sometimes we have workplace violence lawsuits filed about whether the employer was negligent in hiring somebody, retaining somebody, or providing appropriate security. So those are the two areas.
What can an employer do before it happens? I mean, I'm sure you've counseled people on different employers have called you to say, well, what should I be doing before when they've heard these incidents in the news?
Yeah. So the best thing the employer can do is plan for the worst and hope for the best. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the planning part is a very intentional planning. You need to have a policy. Now, everybody knows we shouldn't have workplace violence. You want to work in a place without it, but for the employer to set forth what workplace violence is, and what employees and employees shouldn't do that, but more importantly, what employees can do to help help identify potential workplace violence issues, or what to do to report them. Okay, so having a policy. The other part of this is having an overall response plan. And the response plan is one that is extremely important because you're anticipating the worst and having a methodical way to deal with it. Who's going to be the point person for what needs to be done, having a mechanism for what employees are supposed to be doing during an active shooter situation, God forbid. But you're really planning, and in order to come up with that plan, Julie, you need to get the internal stakeholders involved. You need to have HR involved. You need to have, if you're blessed to have security there, having security involved, having the management team involved, and really think through this. And that's important. And then the third part of that is to train. You train on the policy that you've told employees about, and you train the response team as well. So that's the overall approach to trying to mitigate workplace violence.
The second area that you talked about was workplace safety. And so obviously there's always been, not including the violence aspect of it, but just operating safely. So that's changed a lot during the pandemic. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Wow. So that same obligation coming out of OSHA of the employee having the responsibility to provide a reasonably safe workplace under the General Duty Clause applies also to operating safely within a pandemic. Mm-hmm. And particularly with our food and beverage friends, they are and were essential workers and essential services being provided to help the rest of us be able to eat, et cetera. So as part of that, they will have followed the CDC guidelines about mm-hmm. social distancing. And now, fortunately, we have vaccines. And so there are choices to make with regard to vaccinations as well. So following CDC guidelines, and now, dealing with anticipating vaccinations in the workplace.
When you talk about vaccinations, I mean, one of the questions I get all the time, just even though I'm not in employment, but even though I'm not an employment attorney, but I mean, can employers require everyone be vaccinated? I'm sure with the food and beverage industry, that's really an important question for them.
Yeah, great question. And the short answer is yes. Now, so an employer can require vaccinations of all employees, subject to some significant exceptions. One is if the employee has a disability and the disability, prevents vaccination. So there's a process to work through there. The other is if there's a religious objection to it, and there's a process to work through there. But generally speaking, the employer can require it. I think the harder question is, should the employer require it?
Right, that is absolutely a hard question. For those that aren't requiring it, what are some of the steps they're taking? Or even for those that are, there's probably still some safety steps that they're taking.
They are. I think when it comes to can and should, an employer could require vaccination across the board. I would say most are not, at least generally speaking. Okay, healthcare, I think is a different type of equation. But what I've found is that our food and beverage friends, they're having a difficult time finding enough qualified employees to perform these really important jobs often. And if we require vaccination, it may make it even harder to find those employees. And so I think some employers are saying, we encourage, but don't require. We're strongly encouraging people to get vaccinations. Some food and beverage clients are actually providing a vaccination clinic. If they're big enough, you could do that and have people vaccinated on site. And others are encouraging employees, giving them an hour or two extra to go and have the appointment that day for vaccination.
So, absolutely, the vaccinations and requirements and things are on top of everyone's mind. So thank you so much for covering that. I know there's a final area too that you wanted to talk to in terms of workforce issues facing this industry.
Yeah, and that's the threat of unionization. As some of our food and beverage friends are unionized, and that's certainly that certainly happens, and that's certainly a situation often outside of the Southeast. But in the South, in the Carolinas, 3% of the workforce is unionized. So 97% of the workforce is non-union. So more often than not, we're dealing with union-free employers. Pending in Congress right now, Julie, is a bill called the PRO Act, P-R-O Act. It is not a law yet, but it is coming dangerously close to becoming a law. And if it were to pass, there would be more than 20 significant changes to the labor laws that all of them put together would make it extremely easy to unionize a facility, even in the Carolinas.
So that's how close was it when you said it was close to? You think it'll come up again this year?
Oh, it's pending. So the House of Representatives have passed this bill, and it's now it's gone to the Senate. And the Biden administration very much supports this bill. It's one of the on his short list of what he wants to have happen. And so there's a lot of whether or not it becomes law or not really depends upon whether or not the filibuster in the Senate remains the same viable option that it has been for many, many, many years. So if the filibuster still is out there, then there's a good chance it will not be passed by the Senate. But if it goes away, there's a good chance it will be. And then alternatively, the other reason why I said we're dangerously close is that there's the infrastructure bill that's pending, $2.3 trillion worth of money that would go for infrastructure, which is broadly defined. There's discussion by the administration to link the PRO Act to the infrastructure bill, and thereby perhaps avoiding the majority consent required in the Senate. Well, let me clarify that. Therefore, avoiding the risk of a filibuster in the Senate.
Thank you for filling us in on that. Thank you very much. When you were talking, I'm going to go back a little bit. When you were talking about safety issues and things, I mean, obviously the workplace violence we covered, as well as the pandemic. What generally have you seen, though? We all kind of forget sometimes that pre-COVID world that we lived in, but obviously we're all hoping that we're going to live in post-COVID world sometime soon. So what were you seeing in terms of safety concerns in the manufacturing industry kind of pre-COVID that are probably start coming back in when people are, really going back, having 100% people back in the office, in the plant and things like that?
Well, in the most food and beverage situations, they've been operating continuously during the pandemic.
Yeah,
so the safety issues that they had before have continued throughout, and they deal with just providing a safe workplace. And then there are different aspects of that. So there's training aspects, there's aspects to avoid certain hazardous equipment or materials in the workplace. And so most of our food and beverage friends have a safety area that keep up with all the OSHA regulations. And so what they'll be doing at this phase is continuing to do what they've been doing, and that is keep up with the OSHA regulations and carefully monitor their workplace to make it as reasonably safe as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a statistic here that it said almost 3/4 of food processing and packaging firms said they changed their business strategy or operations in response to the pandemic. It's kind of what you're saying, that everybody's been back at work, but they're even providing even safer places, that they've had to look at things, the way that they're doing business and things like that during the pandemic.
Yeah, and during the pandemic, before the vaccinations became available, the real challenge in a food and beverage situation, particularly a processing situation, is that oftentimes employees have to work closely with one another. It's difficult to inject social distancing, or has been. And so for those employers, they've really had to figure out how to do that. And that's been the challenge. And so when you read in the newspaper, oftentimes some are overly critical of the processing industry because of their inability to do all that's been proposed within those confines. But they've worked through it. They've been doing temp checks on the front end. They've been, really active and doing as much social distancing and face mask wearing as they can.
When these employers call you generally, kind of what are their top concerns in terms of the workplace?
That's a great question. So I think when it comes to workplace safety, it is the top concern is to avoid exposing an employee to a known hazard. Okay. And there are lots of equipment that's necessary in the process industry that could hurt people if not used properly. So we have to have proper training, proper records, and then proper guarding of that equipment. So that's probably the primary thing.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the discussion today and all your insight into these workplace issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And then we'll take a little break as we get into our third panelist. So today we're going to cover economic development and workforce initiatives in the upstate of South Carolina. And we will be speaking from 3 representatives. I think we're waiting on one more in terms of the upstate region, and hear about the partnerships in place between these 3 individuals to build and drive a talent pipeline to existing and incoming companies. I'm going to introduce our panel right now. First, we've got John Loomis is the president and CEO of the Upstate Alliance. He's responsible for driving the overall direction of the Alliance, as well as developing relationships and supporting collaboration throughout the region. Prior to his current position, John served as vice president of economic and institutional advancement at Tri-County Technical College, as well as serving as the director of the Anderson County Office of Economic Development. Next, we've got Latokio Trigg. Is the area director of Ready SC, a division of South Carolina Technical College System. Throughout her career at Ready SC, Latokio has worked throughout the upstate region, helping connect employers with a qualified workforce pipeline. And now we've got Dr. Whiteside as well just joined us. So thank you so much for joining us. I've had a little technical difficulty, so thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Whiteside is a professor at Clemson University's Department of Food, Nutrition, and Packaging Science. Dr. Whiteside has expertise in food safety, thermal food processing, food product shelf life, and food packaging. He's taught very short courses and made numerous formal presentations, both domestically and internationally, on a variety of industry-leading topics. So thank you all so much for joining us today. So there's been a lot of talk about everything that's going on in the upstate. 43% growth in food and beverage industry since 2015, very impressive. So the 3 of you have obviously been very hard at work, so thank you. That is a very, very impressive number. John, can you tell us why the Upstate Alliance added food and beverage to its target industry?
Yeah, as we have talked with industry experts, site consultants, and we've just seen the trends over the last couple of years. Everybody's talking about food and beverage. I went to a site selection conference, I think it's been about 2.5 years ago. And I asked one of the top site consultants, what percentage of your business right now is food and beverage? And they said 75%. And then
75%.
and then I went to the next table and asked the next site consultant, how much of your business is food and beverage? And they said, oh, at least half. And then it just kept going. So we knew that this was going to be an area that we really need to focus on. And we started that switch. And then with COVID coming, It's really accelerated the interest here because of the changes in supply chains and the needs of these companies to be closer to their markets, both international companies and domestic companies. So we've really seen an uptick in activity, and looking back, we're really glad that we made the shift, when we did, to start really recruiting these companies.
I mean, great insight. I saw another statistics from Credit Suisse that showed that between March and May, there was a 15 to 30% increase in this industry just based upon COVID and people staying at home and eating at home. So you all were prepared for that. I mean, that's very impressive. So Latokio, before we begin to get into the specifics about Ready SC, you provided us a brief video. So we're going to watch that now. Thank you. So it looked like we had the sound, but not the play. So maybe we'll come back to that. And maybe if you want to go over a little bit that was in there, and we can also send it to the audience for afterwards as well.
Sure, yes.
So absolutely.
Yes, the video was just a short introduction that talks about the services of Ready SC. We are part of the South Carolina Technical College system, and we assist new companies that are coming to the state or ones that are existing here in the state and expanding with recruitment and training services. And we work with companies both small and large, and we are one of the economic incentives for companies to locate or expand in the state.
Great. Well, I'm sure you've been doing a lot with food and beverage with all that growth in the Upstate. So we'll hear a little bit about that later. Yeah. For Dr. Whiteside, thank you so much for joining us. We know that Clemson's always obviously been involved in the agriculture, but in today's climate, it's stretched into new areas. Tell us about Clemson's offering in the packaging sciences.
I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. So I'm not a lawyer, but my wife says I could be one because I can argue with her. So, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Yeah, our extension programs, for those that are not familiar, the state of South Carolina, every state in the United States has what's called a land grant university, which is Clemson University is that university in South Carolina. And they're charged by the federal government and state government to promote and educate agriculture and agricultural related industries. And obviously the food industry is one of those. So we do a lot of things. I coordinate the food manufacturing portion of our program here at the university as a faculty member, conduct trainings with them. We do extension projects, which might be package and product development. It might be a training program specifically for that company for something they need help with. It might be regulatory compliance or assistance. We don't get into, testifying in court, that kind of thing, but we do help them get compliant because, all of us eat food, and I don't know anybody that doesn't want safe food. And so to be safe, we have these regulations they need to follow. And so we help them to understand what those are and then how to get compliant with those. Also, we also do shelf life studies. And also on packaging, there's no food that is not packaged. So we do a lot of work with the packaging companies in our state also to help them. And then we have a couple of opportunities that students get involved. We have a senior design class on the packaging side. And we actually try to incorporate companies in our state, both small and large, that have ideas that they're, wanting to bring forward, and they need some help and maybe don't have all the resources to go out and hire a private packaging consultant to do it. And so they'll cooperate with the university, with that class over the semester. The students, the seniors work on that and then make a formal presentation at the end of the semester to them. So that's been a very successful one, actually. In fact, just talked to a guy just this past week in the Upstate here, who's some people may know Big Dave's Barbecue. And he's looking to go with Amazon and needs some help trying to figure out the packaging because you're going to ship with Amazon, totally different shipping glass jar barbecue sauce, in a retail location versus shipping at UPS. Wow.
So you work with companies like that to help them solve those kind of packaging issues.
Exactly. We're, I tell people, we're somewhat like a state funded consultant in some respects for the state of South Carolina, though my program is actually expands beyond the state of South Carolina and then actually around the world. So I'm fortunate enough to be able to work with companies all over the world, but it brings usually economic impact back to the state, and I'd love to take credit for the growth in our food industry in the last 20 years I've been doing this. I can't, but we have a lot of good things to offer in this state, which most of you are very well of.
Thank you. John, there's been some big names that have been brought into the Upstate: Dr. Pepper, Duke's Mayonnaise, Nestle, Keurig, and among many others. Honing in on one, Nestle's been in the Upstate for over 3 decades. So we're going to watch, you provided us a short video that we're going to watch about Nestle right now. Might take just a second to get that video up. So maybe we can come back to that video once that comes up. So tell us about Nestle and how they've been involved in the Upstate.
Yeah, Nestle's been there for over 30 years. They make Stouffer products. They make the semolina wheat noodles there for like lasagna and things of that nature. They make lean cuisine. So they're just a long-term company that has been in Cherokee County and Gaffney. Has just done really well. And it's a great example of a food company that, you know, can be extremely successful in the upstate of South Carolina for a number of reasons. And a couple of the reasons are right on this phone call with us because of Clemson University and what they do in the packaging science and the food technology area. And then with Ready SC and the training. And so those, you know, having those assets in place are pretty incredible for us.
And what has the Alliance involvement been with Nestle?
Well, you know, we didn't have anything to do with their recruiting because they've been here for 35 years and we've only been here for 20 years. So I'm not going to try to take credit for that. But, you know, we have worked very closely with them. There are companies throughout our region that we use as targets for our marketing. You know, obviously in automotive, BMW, Michelin, and other areas. Yeah. Nestle's been one of ours in food, because they have been such a successful company. And so we built a relationship with them. We've done the video. I hope we'll be able to see it. If not, we can send everybody afterwards. But we use that as a promotional video testimony. When we're talking with food companies, we can show them that, because the best way we can sell the Upstate is by companies selling the Upstate for us. Right.
So it's helpful to have these big players there to bring in other food and beverage.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. Okay, there it is.
There we go. Yeah, so I think, again, we're having a little bit of technical issues that we've got sound, but unfortunately we don't have the actual video. So maybe, again, we can come back to that at the end. Yeah, or if not, we'll definitely post it so that people can see it afterwards. So
the first line of the video says a lot. I mean, Nestle's the largest food company in the world, and they have a facility in the Upstate of South Carolina. So, you know, that's pretty good from right there.
And I mean, from what you're saying too, I mean, just how much that facility has grown. I mean, just sounds like they started out with one food product and have really expanded.
Yeah, they've had a lot of success here.
Yeah,
it's because of the workforce and the market that they're in, because they service the Southeast and you know, being right on I-85 and having, you know, connectivity there, it's just perfect spot.
Yeah. So Latokia, John mentioned workforce and things. I mean, how has the workforce training changed in the last 5 years for the food and beverage industry?
Well, I think what I've seen in the past few years is just more technology and more automation being brought into the facilities. The lines are now running at really extremely high speeds, and even things like warehousing that typically would have a lot of material handlers. You know, they have brought robotics or the automated guided vehicles into the warehouse. Even have some automatic retrieval systems.
Yeah.
So you know, those environments definitely lend itself to need the operators with more skills than what would typically be in the years past. More technical skills in terms of baseline mechanical and knowledge, electrical knowledge, because they're not just operating a machine anymore. They are being a part of a process in which they are enabling those machines to operate. So those are some of the major changes that I've seen.
Absolutely. Where 15 years ago, that wasn't even on the landscape. I mean, so that's so interesting that, and you all have to, I mean, you all are helping with that training. So it's so important. Yeah.
Exactly. And our approach when we work with one of our partner companies really begins with, and when they see the video, it'll allude to this, is what we call discovery. So when we're working with a client, that's our first step. We're going to meet with them. We're going to try to understand as much as we can about their process. We collect job descriptions. We will make a visit to an existing facility and spend some time there if we can go see the process itself. And that helps us better understand the knowledge and the skills that are going to be required for those particular jobs. And, you know, we talk with them about if there's an existing facility, what's working. You know, what are you doing now that's working? Well, we don't need to recreate that. We just need to figure out the best way to replicate that here. And then we talk about, you know, where are some of the gaps, and we will customize curriculum to deal specifically with those gaps that are identified. And real important is something that we will work with our client is to develop internal trainers through our Train the Trainer program, which helps with the line side training. So we give them some tools and train some of their employees who are involved in the process training on the job. And so that really leaves the company, once Ready SC is out of the picture, they've got an established trainers within their workforce to help with training their new hires.
Well, I'm sure all the training that you all offer, it's definitely something that helps John in terms of bringing industry and things into our state. So it's a good partnership there without a doubt. So Dr. Whiteside, tell us a little bit, we've been talking this morning about safety in terms of the workplace and things like that, but Clemson does a lot in terms of safety just with the food, right, that you can offer to people. Can you tell us a little bit about that with your program in there?
Yes. The trainings that Latokia talked about on their end are very beneficial, and I just piggyback on that. She's exactly right. Automation is taken over in the food industry, so speeds are really fast. So I tell people a mechanic today typically may have a toolbox, but I know you'll have a laptop. Because he's going to have to, you know, and understand how to do that. And so they talk in a language that is very specific to that. So that's the thing. But I don't get into that stuff. We get into the food safety issues. So there's regulations that are from FDA, and in the state of South Carolina, SCDA is the regulatory authority for FDA. So a lot of people in our state will never see an FDA officer, but they will see a South Carolina Department of Ag official acting on behalf of FDA, do contract work. So we get them regulatory compliant under, there was some FSMA law passed in federal law in 2011 by President Obama, was the first sweeping changes in food safety law in probably 70 years. So that implemented a lot of things that are really good. It basically took HACCP and put HACCP into all the food industry, not just the juice, dairy, and meat industry. And so that means that all of our food today is a lot safer than it was, you know, 20 years ago. But people have to have trainings, and we are, myself and several of my colleagues here on the Clemson Food Safety Extension team, we are trained and certified trainers for FSMA training, for preventive controls, for produce safety, better process controls. So a lot of these companies have to comply, and they have to get this training, and they come through Clemson to do that.
That's a wonderful thing that Clemson can offer these companies. As you said, it's not just for South Carolina. I'm sure you're doing that for companies all over the country, and it sounds like internationally as well.
For sure. And the good thing with that is, I tell people, is my network expands, state of South Carolina's network expands.
Right.
So I've been able to bring business to, say, Sapaco down in Bennettsville and Mullins from Arkansas, you know, that they called me because they knew what I did in the area I worked in. And they said, do you have somebody to recommend? I said, actually, I do. And they're in the state of South Carolina. So I'm always trying to push our businesses in the state, because I'm South Carolina born and bred. And so I want to make sure they come to our state to do it, not some other state.
Well, John, talking about businesses coming into the area, what did you see, John, in 2020, and how has that changed in 2021? John? I think he's on I think his screen got frozen. So
he did on mine.
So yeah, so we'll come back to both you, Latoki and Scott. You can, I mean, and Dr. Whiteside, you can probably both answer that in terms of, you know, what did you see in the changes, Dr. Whiteside, in terms of this industry in 2020, and then what's happening in 2021?
Julie, probably the biggest change was my grandmother told me when I started working on my PhD in food technology, she said, Scott, that's good. Everybody's got to eat. So just because the pandemic came through didn't mean we should quit eating. You know,
well,
so
it sounds like we ate a lot more, actually.
we just switched where we're eating. We don't eat in restaurants for a while. So people that had business in that, you know, industry, like CF Sour, they have a lot of restaurant business. So it hurt them in some respects, but their retail grocery store business, people like Sapaco, Nestle, all those, their business, they could not keep up with the basic SKUs, because they were running so wide open to do that. Then you had workers out, so it really put them in a bind. And right now they're hurting because they can't find employees, and their business is just booming. You know, I just talked to one of them this past week, and I said, how's business? It's great if you can find us some people to work. You know, we can't find people to work.
Right. Absolutely.
But that was probably the biggest thing, going from restaurant business to retail grocery store business. So that everybody, if you're a retail grocery supplier, you did well.
Yeah. Absolutely. And all the companies, you know, bringing things into those grocery stores are doing, they saw such an increase. But I agree with you, but also, you know, unfortunately a decrease in terms of what they were supplying to restaurants and things.
Right. And we'll see that as we come back out of this, we'll start to see that shift back a little bit. But yeah, that was it.
Yeah. So John, thank you, Dr. Whiteside. So John, can you tell us a little bit about kind of what you saw in terms of activity in 2020, and then what you're seeing in 2021?
Yeah, in 2020, you know, we started out the year really good, January, February, and then, you know, March, things just really came to a fairly quick standstill. We started really trying to assist our existing industries and work with our local economic developers on how, you know, we could help them, and activity really dropped off. However, about October, activity really started going back up, and it's been really busy during all of 2021. And we're seeing, you know, food and beverage projects, pharma, PPE type projects, and then projects across the board. Now, that being said, you know, a lot of it has been domestic. We haven't seen near as much international, just because of the inability for people to travel and get focused. But I think that the activity now, it's as busy now as it's ever been for me in this job over the last 7 years.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible, especially like you said, when the international isn't as large as it was. So that's very impressive.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of what we do is international, but domestic side, and still some international that can, you know, contact us. You know, we're doing that, but we still can't travel internationally, obviously. So that is, you know, affecting to some extent, but I think overall activity is really good. And as we talk with our members, our local economic developers, they are very busy. Our, you know, private sector members, contractors, things of that nature. And then I know the folks at Ready SC are incredibly busy. So yeah, I see the rest of 2021 into 2022 being good.
That's great news. That's really great news to hear. And Latoki, John was just mentioning in terms of Ready SC and you all being so busy, what do you see kind of the food and beverage? What are their specific questions when John's bringing somebody around and you're letting them know what you can do for them? I mean, for food and beverage, what are you really seeing as opposed to other companies?
Yeah, I think what I've seen in terms of the food and beverage specifically, I mean, the quality safety only it's a little different based on the FDA regulations and questions around that. You know, but those are top concerns and you know that they want to focus on. But also with that technology that has happened in all the automation, a lot of times we see that their equipment is very customized and specific for that product that they're producing. And so, you know, as a prospect, sometimes they're asking us, well, you know, how are you all going to help us with that type of training? You know, it's very customized. and meet our ever aggressive timelines that they have for
Right.
startup. And we actually can help with that too, because we
Yeah.
have the ability to work with the company to have transfer of knowledge by maybe sending someone, some of our trainees to other locations for training, and or to have a vendor involved in that training if it's very proprietary and specific customized equipment machinery. So that really also sets us apart sometimes from other states, that we do have the ability to partner with them in ways that we can, if we're not physically performing that training, that we have options that we can get their employees trained by sending them to another location.
Thank you. That's really interesting. You were talking about kind of the partnering and things, and so I'm sure there's also, as Dr. Whiteside was mentioning, there's a lot of partnering in terms of what Clemson's doing as well. Are there any kind of specific companies you want to tell us about, Dr. Whiteside?
Yeah, I can't get into details maybe on the specific projects, but I mentioned earlier Sapaco down in Bennettsville and Mullins. Work with them extensively, do trainings, projects, and everything. And for those of you who don't know, Sapaco is one of the largest, if not the largest, MRE supplier to the U.S. military. So that's the core of their business. But they also have a private label business too that they do, and they've been growing. And again, they need labor. They need labor extensively right now. Seaside Farms is down on the coast. Another one that is a large tomato grower, but now they got over into processing. They make a Bloody Mary mix that has really become popular and growing, and they're expanding their business. So I would tell John too, not just new business coming in, but a lot of our businesses are here growing, expanding, that. And then also Palmetto Processing over around the Edgefield area. Peach Farm that put in a processing facility about 3 years ago, state of the art. And they just told me the other day on the phone, they're getting ready to expand their facility massively also.
Wow.
So we're working extensively with them on process and package issues and things to be regulatory compliant. So to be in the food industry now is a good thing. It's a growing industry, and we all need to push the state of South Carolina, because in my opinion, travel all over the country and a lot of food shows and talking to people, we have a lot of things to offer that other states do not.
That's
Definitely
great.
California, because they want to get out of there and they want to come where they can be friendly, so that's the big thing.
Right, absolutely. I'm sure, John, you've probably seen a lot of that, people coming into South Carolina looking that are moving from other parts of the country since they've heard so much about the food and beverage and what's going on at Clemson and Ready SC and that type of thing.
Yeah, we're really targeting, California, the Northeast, Midwest for companies, particularly food and beverage companies that want to be here and have an East Coast market presence and can get closer to their markets. I mean, we are 1 day driving distance from the middle of the Upstate to 100 million people, 100 million customers.
Wow.
And if you look at us logistically on a map, we're halfway between New York and Miami. We have the Port of Charleston that we can bring goods in and out of. We have everything going for us. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is our water, both availability and quality. And that water availability and quality is big for food processors.
Right.
We've got some of the highest quality water in the country right here in the Upstate. So that's another thing that really we have going for us. And again, Clemson's programs in packaging science and food science are just incredible, that these companies can really take advantage of when they get here.
Julie, I'd add to what John said also. The other thing I would put in there, we have good land, and the water is a big issue because that's California's death knell is water. But the other one, as you were mentioned earlier on a previous session, was union, non-union. That's a biggie right there. If you talk to a food company and they look to come to our state, because we have some really, really large food companies in our state.
Yeah,
and part of that has to do with they don't want to be tied to a union.
Well,
and another thing, Julie, if I could, I'm sorry, but another thing that we also have to talk about is our breweries and distilleries, which on a smaller level in our state, but we have a lot of those, and that is a burgeoning industry that employs a lot of people and makes a lot of money for the state. I think you're going to see that continue, and even larger ones like the big project down in Columbia with White
Right.
Claw that came in. I mean, things like that are very significant. But that industry, I think, is going to continue to prosper.
Well, that sounds like a great topic for us to cover in one of the food and beverage. One of these seminars is to cover that. I think that'd be really interesting. And thank you all. I hate to cut us off because it's all been so very, very interesting. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that everyone that's been on the line today has as well. So thanks, the three of you. So thank you for all the work you all do together. And it's obviously grown this industry so much in our state, and it's very important to the state. And I look forward to maybe coming together in a few months and hearing about kind of these other success stories that you all have with you all being so busy in 2021. I mean, very, very impressive. So thank you so much for participating today.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you. Thank you. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and please be on the lookout for a survey in your email. We'd appreciate your feedback today. We've already talked about that we want to do some more of these seminars. So if anybody has any other ideas on things that they'd like to hear about, we're very, very open to hear that. And we might improve some of our capabilities in terms of videos and things, but those videos will be sent out, so everybody will have the chance to see those. So thank you so much, and thank you for spending your Friday morning with us. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.